This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Representative Connie Wilson, John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and former Senator, former Chairman of the State Board of Education, Howard Lee. We hope you've enjoyed your Thanksgiving weekend. On this week's show, we're going to talk about a Supreme Court case that could affect North Carolina's redistricting, a court challenge by the State Board of Education to eliminate oversight by the Rules Review Commission, and decreasing revenues to our state. Plus, we're going to ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's begin. Sure as Halloween ended and Christmas decorations started appearing, the 2016 election campaign started November 5th. Attorney General Roy Cooper, the front-runner for the Democratic nomination for governor, came out of the gates recommending redistricting reform. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court is considering a case that might impact those discussions. In Alabama, the Legislative Black Caucus is sued because their legislature packed African Americans into districts where they already had political control. They claim that's racial gerrymandering because by packing majorities of minorities into smaller numbers of voting districts, they segregated African Americans and limited their ability to influence other elections. Lawmakers responded by saying the Voting Rights Act required them to protect minority voters, and that's exactly what they did. Justice Scalia said it was ironic the Black Caucus was making the argument that opponents of black plaintiffs had formerly made. Chris, Senate Minority Leader Dan Blue has been saying this same thing since the Republicans redistricted our state. If the court rules that packing districts like Alabama and North Carolina have done is illegal, what implications could it have?
Well, if they rule that it's illegal, there's a chance that we may have to do redistricting again. It is an interesting, the old version of this was you had to draw the districts in a way that gave minority, or gave minorities an opportunity to elect their own representatives, to elect minority representatives. And the question now is have the Republicans gone overboard and packed minorities well beyond what they need to have a minority representative and just done it for political gerrymandering reasons and actually diminished minority representation. But your first part of your question, I think, is a real issue, which is how long are we going to have this nonsensical back and forth in the courts and have these ridiculous districts drawn that nobody can understand that both parties have done? I think redistricting reform actually, the momentum for that is growing, and I think it'll be an interesting issue in the 2015 session of the General Assembly. I do believe there's significant support for changing the way districts are drawn beginning in 2021, the next time we have to draw these districts.
John, Justice Roberts made an interesting point during these arguments. He said that if Alabama's legislature had actually reduced the number of minorities in these majority-minority districts by any significant numbers, the U.S. Attorney General would have been on them like a ton of bricks, to paraphrase Roberts. Do you agree with him?
Yes. The basic problem here, and I agree with Chris that redistricting reform is a good idea, but this is actually a separate matter. This is a federal matter. Any redistricting process, whether it's a commission or a set of rules enforced by the legislative staff or the current system done by the legislators themselves, any of those would have to comply with the current understanding of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And that's what's at issue in front of the Supreme Court. And essentially what is being argued is the law now requires a sweet spot. You have to have a certain number of African Americans, or in some cases Hispanics, in a particular district, but you can't have too many. And as you look at more of the arguments that are being made by the plaintiffs, what it suspiciously sounds like is you have to have just the right amount to maximize Democratic representation in Congress and legislatures. And that's why I think their argument is going to run up against the Supreme Court, who says in the past, gerrymandering's bad, but we can't say it's unconstitutional to gerrymander for partisan reasons. And so I think they've got a difficult argument. But if that Alabama case goes the plaintiff's way, it clearly has an effect on North Carolina.
Howard, you've been a person who has run in statewide elections. So the question now is, after all these years, do we need the Voting Rights Act still?
I think we need some form of a Voting Rights Act. I'm not sure we need the Voting Rights Act at the level
as it's now constituted.
But I think it's important to have districts where there is equal opportunity balance in these districts among ethnic groups as well as among parties.
But you can see how people have manipulated that law so that they can pack these districts. Connie, as a Republican for many years, you sat on the other side of the fence when Democrats were redistricting, complaining about how unfair this process is. Now the shoe's on the other foot. Do you have any idea, any notion that we're going to change the redistricting process in North Carolina?
I doubt it, and I laugh thinking back to the days that we had 3- and 4-member districts. I mean, it was crazy how lines were drawn back then. And it's basically been through a series of court cases that have allowed us to refine what's going on there. I think what we've got going on now, though, the group that's been hurt the worst are moderate Democrats, because they're like dinosaurs at the legislative level and at the congressional level.
As are moderate Republicans, I'm going to point out.
Well, touche, but we've got them both there. And so I think it would be nice to have some of those other voices in there also.
I heard a discussion the other day, and they were talking about this very thing, and somebody asked, when is it going to change? And the comment was made, not until we have another major political scandal that forces it to change. Anybody disagree with that?
I think redistricting reform is actually based upon self-interest. The Republicans, as we get towards 2020, might come to believe that taking out an insurance policy against losing the legislature in 2020 and having revenge exacted on them is a possibility. They might be worried enough about that to take out insurance. That's redistricting reform.
Well, you can have additional video content from our website, ncspin.com. You can read and see these NC Spin perspectives only on ncspin.com or NC Spin on Facebook. And we're tweeting now at NC Spin Tweets. Balanced debate for the old North State. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about NC tax revenues being down.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
My name is Bernie Teal. Sunburst Farms has been in my family for over 35 years. Last year I had to do something I'd never done before. Destroy 10 acres of good squash. I wasn't able to find enough workers. The opportunity is there. American families are demanding locally grown vegetables, and I want to provide that to them. So please tell Congress that we need immigration reform now.
I think family physicians are very conscious of cost. They want to order the right test at the right time for the right patient. If you have someone else who is interjected in that decision making, who has profit as their bottom line motive, I think it changes the whole conversation. You lose trust. I think the trust is with the family physician who has the patient's best interest at heart. If the person making those recommendations and decisions about testing and procedures and going to see a particular specialist, if that is being made with profit in mind, there's no way a patient can have trust in that.
North Carolina's family physicians support Medicaid reform that keeps healthcare decisions right where they belong, between the patient and their trusted family physician. OurNCHealthcare.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
After 3 months of the state's fiscal year, tax revenues are down by more than $300 million over the same period last year. But North Carolina isn't alone. Revenues in 29 states are lower than before the recession. State Budget Director Lee Roberts says it's too early to sound the alarm, and that what matters is where the budget stands in relation to what it was projected to be. Roberts says the budget's actually about $61 million less than what it was projected to be. Connie, you served on the Finance Committee for many years in the legislature, and you tracked revenues. We hear what Lee Roberts is saying, but this also appears to be a statement that North Carolina's economy is not growing very fast. What's your take on this?
You know, our economy is picking up. I think we're still seeing some of the impacts of the tax reforms that occurred there. There's been very tight control of the budget. I know with the DHS DHHS budget, there was a $16 million flex cut that they're looking at putting into place. The appropriate changes are being made to nullify or at least minimize any loss or less revenue that's anticipated. I don't see a problem with it at this time. I know there's tremendous focus with key legislators looking for revenue sources at this point in time. So I think we'll see some more ideas popping up as the long session comes around.
Howard, the Democrats are trying to make a political issue out of this, saying it's another sign of the regressive policies of the Republican leaders that are hurting our state. But then the Cato Institute, which is admittedly a right-leaning organization, gave North Carolina its highest possible grade on their fiscal report card. How do you respond to those two different issues?
Well, I think it's very difficult to balance that. I think North Carolina is handling it quite well, and certainly I think it's putting us in a good position.
So what impact, Chris, would you say that the 2014 elections are going to have on fiscal policy in North Carolina? I mean, the Republicans still maintain their veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate. They still are in the governor's mansion. Are they going to see that as a mandate to keep cutting taxes and cutting spending?
I think so, although it's hard to imagine. I think they're going to continue tax reform. I think that'll mean less tax revenue. I think the question is what can they do significantly in 2015? We are going to be short some revenue. I think it's too early to say what that'll be. We're $61 million below projections. We'll have to wait until April and see what the actual revenues are. There are some people who believe we'll have a significant budget hole this year. The tax cuts do cost more than we originally thought. Of course, Governor McCrory said they'd be revenue neutral. Well, that was absurd. They cost $500 million. Now it's up to $700 million was the estimate that was built into the budget. So I think we will have some revenue shortfall. The question will be how much. I don't think there'll be enough money to give any more significant tax cuts and give teachers that didn't get a raise the past year a raise and fill in some of these education cuts.
We need to, the $61 million was for the first quarter. We've actually got another month of data, and it's a little bit larger. I don't think a panic is necessary, but I do think the legislature, and I'm pretty sure the governor's office is already taking seriously the possibility that there may still, as Chris is alluding to, there may have been some miscalculations, not about economic growth, it's actually not the point. It's about the effects of the tax reform on withholding and on employment, quarterly payments by self-employed. Remember, they had a brief period where they had an exemption for the first several thousand dollars of their income. That's gone away. Some of them may not know that, so they may not be receiving as much money up front. So the point is we don't really know what the number looks like until next spring, because a lot of the uncertainty can only be determined when people start filing their income taxes in 2015. But I think it would be prudent to prepare, not for some gigantic budget hole, but to prepare in case you end up with some revenue that for this fiscal year is not what you expect.
Okay, so what's this legislature going to do? There are two ways of dealing with it: cut state spending or raise taxes.
They're not going to raise taxes, and I actually don't think in 2015 there will be any significant tax cuts. I think they will focus on more savings in the budget, both in the social services area, all across the budget, lapse positions, that sort of thing. I think this will be a year in which they have a tight budget, but they're still going to try to do some of their priorities.
Anybody different opinion than that?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on the size of, if there is a shortfall. I think there will be one, the size of it. And remember, there were teachers that didn't get a raise last year. There were some folks that were promised we'll do more next year, that we can only do 1 year at a time. I think if they don't give teachers some small raise and give teachers didn't get a raise some increase, there'll be a lot of political problems.
For 2016?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, after these messages, we're going to talk about who makes the rules.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception. keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Do you love the history and art of North Carolina? Then you'll want a copy of Southport's Art Newton, a stunning 160-page coffee table book filled with the beautiful watercolors of coastal Carolina artist Art Newton. Southport's Art Newton was published by Southport native and noted North Carolinian Tommy Harrelson, and is filled with brilliant paintings of the buildings, boats, and beaches of southeastern Carolina. Look for Southport's Art Newton at local bookstores across the state or purchase it online at Amazon.
We now return to NC Spin.
Article 9, Section 5 of North Carolina's Constitution states, the State Board of Education shall supervise and administer the free public school system, and shall make all needed rules and regulations in relations thereto, subject to laws enacted by the General Assembly. Well, the State Board of Education says it's clear and it's understandable. What's not understandable, they contend, is why the rules they set have to be reviewed by the NC Rules Review Commission. They're asking the court to declare that the Rules Review Commission doesn't have authority over the State Board. Howard Lee, you served as chair of that State Board of Education. How big a problem was it during your tenure? And do you agree that the current State Board is right in asking that the Rules Review Commission essentially be exempted from what they think is subverting their authority?
The problem was that the whole process is just an aggravating one, to know that you are really putting something in place and somebody else who probably doesn't know as much as you is sitting out there ready to tell you whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I have a disdain from these outside bodies that come in and second guess the official bodies that are responsible for carrying out a process. And in the case of the State Board, I think they are exactly right. They have the responsibility for running and overseeing the operation of the public schools. And I don't know that anybody should be able to second guess what they're doing, since they are accountable to the governor, they're accountable to the people, and they're accountable to working with other school boards, and they're accountable to the legislature.
Yeah, exactly. Former Justice Bob Orr, who was on this show a couple of weeks ago, John, said that since 1986, when the Rules Review Commission was started, they've objected to, and in many instances modified, every single rule the State Board of Education has passed. Isn't this essentially making them a de facto Board of Education?
Well, not exactly. Now, I'm sympathetic to the argument about separation of powers. But keep in mind, the State Board of Education absolutely has no authority to do any rulemaking that is contrary to the legislature's rules that the legislature votes on. Okay, so the debate here is not whether the State Board of Education should be checked by somebody. It absolutely, by the Constitution, can't do anything unless the legislature says it's okay. The real issue is, can the legislature basically subcontract that responsibility to appointed rules review commissioners? Okay, this is a legislative entity. The Rules Review Commission is controlled by the legislature, right. But the argument is they can't. The legislators, the elected representatives, can't lodge the authority in even an entity they control. Those legislature themselves should be voting. If they want to countermand something the State Board of Education does, the legislature itself should be voting.
And that's the case. That's the case Bob Orr was trying to make, Connie, when he was arguing with the plaintiffs on this case. Let's talk about what happens if the court agrees with the State Board of Education, and what happens if they don't agree with them. What do you think what the fallout will be?
If the courts agree with the State Board of Education, then that means that a process that ensures that there are public hearings for rules, because we're talking about thousands and thousands of rules. A legislator may get a bill passed that's this long, and then there's 100 rules that can come out of that.
So we could see a domino effect.
A tremendous domino effect. Well, there would be actually less transparency in how these rules are being implemented. And it's not that the Rules Review Commission is coming up with policy. What they're saying is that there are some very basic tenets that have to be met, that it's clear that you followed
it follows the intent of
the legislation. So they're not saying, oh, we don't like this policy, we like this one better. So that's actually very important, because people are people, and folk have an agenda all over the place.
Well, Chris, one of the points that they made is that This is not an executive branch agency. The State Board of Education is not an executive or administrative agency from the standpoint of the executive branch of government. So therefore, they should be exempted from this review.
Right, and I do think it's interesting. If the court rules against them, then nothing is going to change. To follow up on your question, if the court rules for them, I don't think that. I'm sympathetic to the argument, as John put it, that former Justice Orr has and the State Board of Education has. What's fascinating to me, the politics of this are fascinating. This is a Republican board appointed by the Republican governor. Again, you could portray this as another dispute between the executive branch and the legislative branch of government. We talked last week about another one, about a lawsuit about separation of powers to appointments. So I think what we're in the middle of here is a restructuring and a lot of small skirmishes about a big battle about how state government is run, and we're going to see this continue. And it's ironic because it's happening when Republicans control all three branches of government.
But it is not about partisanship. And really, if there is a problem with the Rules Review Commission, I hope that it is fixable through constitutional amendment, because it is critical that the legislature maintain the authority over regulators. The biggest problem we have is regulators doing things that are not authorized by the legislature. That's the bigger problem.
But it would require a constitutional amendment.
If the court case goes the plaintiff's way, then you'd have to adjust it. But I would think the legislature needs a practical way to rein in regulation.
All right. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
One of my favorite parts of the show is when we ask our panelists to tell us something we don't know. They get to choose the topic and sound off on it for a few minutes. So, John Hood, we'll start with you. Tell us something we don't know.
Tom, I think that in 2015, an issue that people may not have even imagined a few years ago will be a significant topic, and that is Uber and Lyft and other kinds of shared services models for delivering services to consumers. In this case, it has to do with taxi cabs. The taxi companies are saying we have to comply with all these regulations and we have to collect taxes and so forth, and our competitors, these new services, don't have to do that. Now, there is a group of people that want to apply the same rules that currently apply to taxi cabs to drivers that participate in Uber and Lyft. But I think another faction, bipartisan faction, and I think the proper view is that what we ought to do is deregulate some of these taxi companies so they can compete more effectively.
Wow. Connie, tell us something we don't know.
I hate to say this. I had a thought. It comes, it goes. That's my age. I know I talked long enough. I remembered it. I thought it was interesting. About 2 or 3 weeks ago at the Legislative Building, there was a buzz going on about an economic development special session. In fact, I thought, hey, this would be a great opportunity to work some folk. But with these 2 lawsuits that are out there, you can tell there's no interest at all with that. And on top of it, with the House chamber being remodeled right now, we don't know where they'd meet anyway.
And evidently, the project that they might have envisioned for having to come back into special session hasn't come to fruition yet. Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
Well, you all are familiar with the Appalachian Trail. In 1977, as Secretary of Natural Resources, I proposed that we have a trail in North Carolina called the Mountains to the Sea Trail. It is now stretched to 1,000 miles from Clingman's Dome to the sand dunes, and more than 10 people a year walk that 1,000 miles across the state. Today, there is a person who is walking it who's a vet. Her hiking name is Mama Goose. And she's trying to set an example of how vets returning from the war should get on a trail and walk off what she calls the war to readjust themselves to life.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Chris, tell us something we
the
don't know.
NEEKC Foundation is noted for putting out a report called Kids Count, which ranks kids in how the right states and how they're doing treating children. In North Carolina, we have 25% of kids in poverty, 39% of African American kids live in poverty. They put out a follow-up report recently about kids and families, talking about poor families, and this might not be surprising, but 79% of families with poor children have no parent with a education higher than high school. And 50%, I find this, you can look at this two ways, 50% of the families who live in poverty and have a child, there are no parent that has a full-time paying job. And that's what most people seized upon. I was struck by the fact that half those families do have a parent who works full-time, year-round, and can't make enough to lift his or her family out of poverty.
Well, I got one. One of the great panelists on our show, Cash Michaels, had a stroke several weeks ago, and we've talked with Cash. Cash is in rehab. He is doing well, wants to thank all of the friends and all of the people who have sent prayers and good wishes his way, and is looking forward to getting back on NC Spin very soon, as we are all, and we wish him just the best. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read our weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. We hope you'll join us next week when NC Spin will take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.